Hi, and welcome to Time Extend episode 14 here. It's Adam Ismail as always. I am joined today with the wonderful
Brendan Rorison, and today we'll be discussing a few topics. Some could be considered news, I guess, but we're going to be kind of freewheeling it, as we called our last episode of this type, free practice, isn't it, Adam? We're just going to have some off-the-riff discussions in the start of the new year to bring in 2019 with a bang, hopefully.
Yeah, a lot of our previous episodes were kind of designed around, like, you know, we just had the big Ridge Racer list, right, and, you know, older Dreamcast Let's Plays, essentially, so we're going to try and get caught up with 2019, start the year off on a current sort of tangent, because if you haven't noticed lately, we've tried to move away from the news and then features sort of organization of the podcast that we did throughout the first, I don't know, probably like 10 episodes, just because it didn't seem like it was fostering like the most interesting discussion. So we're going to use this week to get caught up with everything, and then don't worry, we'll be straight back into talking about some esoteric Dreamcast racing game you probably forgot about 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think this new format is just going to suit the new year a lot better, because we like to look enthusiastic for everything to do with the racing genre, but there are definitely topics that we feel as if we can have better discussions in, so hopefully the free listeners that we have don't mind the change in focus.
Right, and I mean, the first topic we're going to talk about today is something that has been brewing for a very, very, very long time, because you have made a point of making sure that you mention it every single episode since we started.
Well, somebody's got to. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we started this podcast, after all. It was only for V-Rally 4, and the Switch version finally came out.
Woo! It's still not out in the US, I don't think. I think it comes out in like a couple weeks, yeah.
It's just a bit unfortunate for you American folk, then, that you don't get to harness the incredible nature of V-Rally 4. But I'll try not to rub it in too much. So, yeah. It's a funny story about this, actually. It did come out roughly the second week of December, and I was like, I might pick this up purely because it's been such a joke on the podcast. And I was waiting for any reason to. And then, of course, Adam, you popped up my Facebook Messenger, like, oh, I didn't realise V-Rally wasn't coming out till February in the US. I kind of felt that nudge in the back, like, you need to buy this so we can discuss it in the podcast. And I had been waiting for that push, so yeah, I actually bought the digital version for £45.
Oh my god. I just feel guilty now. I mean, it wasn't even me, let's be honest. You knew what was coming. You knew that you were on this road and this is where it was going to take you. But, I mean, from what you've told me, it sounds like the game's kind of okay.
Yeah, we should just jump right in with the impressions then. I would say that V-Rally 4 is probably the type of racing game you'd love to see at the launch of a console. It's pretty much the definition of a 7 out of 10 rally game at its best, and a 6 out of 10 at its worst. It's a fairly consistent, decent rally game, and that will sound boring to the likes of PlayStation and Xbox owners that have had the chance to play Dirt Rally and Dirt 4, WRC7, but I can't quite believe that, in my opinion, this is the first competent semi-realistic racing game we've got on Switch, and it is pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah, well, its competition is Gear Club, which some people like, but I reviewed both Gear Clubs for the Switch and for GT Planet, and I cannot understand what if anything makes them redeeming. So yeah, the bar is very low, but yeah, at the same time, it's like you have V-Rally 4, which does enough things right to kind of pass for when you really want to play a racing game and you've got nothing else at your disposal, so that's pretty cool in and of itself.
Yeah, the thing I like about the game is it's pretty much the perfectly downscaled port. They didn't use any fancy tricks to make the Switch version run particularly well or remove any features, which is something weird you always see in Nintendo games. That companies remove features and almost act as if it's an accessibility feature. This is pretty much a case of, this is how it looks on PS4. The PS4 version pretty much looked like a PS3 game with slightly higher textures. and they've just downscaled it for the Switch. And I've posted a few videos on my Twitter account about how strange the game can look at times, because like there's trees in the backgrounds of some of the tracks, and they look absolutely god awful, like origami stuff. But like the weird thing is, then there's like sun reflections on muddy ground when there's been rain, and there's like birds flying overhead and stuff. So there's this like, weird kind of atmosphere of they wanted to cram in everything environmental about the game, but they weren't particularly bothered about making it look nice. So it kind of gives this weird vibe of it feels like a Vita game, and that isn't really a compliment, because I mean it in the sense of PlayStation owners have always been obsessed with having like handheld versions of home games, and this is what this feels like, a case of, look, we can do this, rather than an example you said, Adam, like Fast RMX on the Switch, where the developers are looking at what the hardware can do and trying to maximise that. This is very much a case of get it in a shippable condition and put it on the shelves, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly not a lazy thing. I don't like using that term. It's just a case of it definitely feels like an inferior port of a game that we've just described as a 7 out of 10 at its best. So make no mistake, if you're absolutely desperate for a competent racing game, I do think V-Rally delivers. However, if you're ever tasked with selling anybody on this game, I'm afraid that isn't possible, really, if somebody has played any other rally game in the past 5 years.
Yeah, it sounds like you take a game like... I mean, I'm not comparing the full console PS4 version of V-Rally 4 to Forza Horizon 4. But I'm imagining if you took Forza Horizon 4 and then you somehow found a way to lower the settings like beyond the lowest possible level. And based on what I've seen, I mean, like in your videos, yeah, it does look like the full game, but then they made a lot of very, very strong concessions to things like the way that the shadows load, for example. So you're driving and like 20 feet in front of you is a point where like all of the LOD pop-in happens, but it's also the point where like the shadows actually, like the real-time shadows generate. So yeah, it's a pretty rough around the edges looking port, but as you say, it's kind of the only way that a game like this will end up on the Switch, because unfortunately it's just not a haven for racing games, so better this than nothing, I suppose.
And the thing is as well, like, I don't mean this in a totally negative light, but nobody really gives a shit about V-Rally at its best on PlayStation 4 and Xbox, so can you really blame Kyloton for making this kind of port rather than one with a lot of care into it? Because the fact of the matter is, it's probably going to sell as much if it ran at 10 frames per second or if it ran at 60, and that is the sad matter of fact, that the Switch isn't a haven for racing games, and V-Rally isn't suddenly going to transform that. But one of the things that I really don't have time for is, like, I was looking up reviews of the game by the 4 or 5 Nintendo fan sites that reviewed it, and it's honestly like looking at a game review from like 2010 or something, where it's losing points because it doesn't have a rewind feature, because it's difficult, because there's just all these weird arbitrary things that makes you realise why F-Zero isn't a thing anymore. Just like this weird, like, V-Rally should accommodate for my lack of ability, when the whole point of Rally is to get fucked up. Like, that's kind of why we play it. We enjoy getting messed over by the environmental dangers and accidentally misreading a corner. And yeah, it just feels like if the game was going to have any sort of success as well, it needed to have the kind of community that solely play Switch games kind of welcome it and see its effort. But there was one site I seen that rated Gear Club 2 higher, and that kind of sums it up, the sense that we really haven't got the type of audience on Switch for V-Rally, and we certainly don't have anybody who's going to champion it outside of a few small YouTubers who put in a lot more effort into their reviews than some of the bigger sites.
Yeah, and just as a quick side note, the whole point of Rally is to get fucked up is my favorite Lil Jon lyric.
I love it.
Anyway, this is one of those situations, I think, where it's on the console that, unfortunately, there's not much interest in those kinds of games, so the only sites that will review it are the ones that basically review every Switch game because it comes out on the Switch, but then the Switch isn't a place that you're going to find the game like V-Rally most of the time, so it is that journalism that you talked about a couple episodes ago.
Yeah,
definitely, and I should definitely check out like one of those YouTube reviews that you mentioned, because I would like somewhat of a 5-minute, 10-minute explainer on the game, because I probably won't buy it, but I'd like to see what I'm missing.
Yeah, some of those videos basically explain in depth why somebody might be interested in the game, but there's also those caveats that you expect, and as is this culture, as soon as somebody mentions that the frame rate might drop to 20 or 25, people in the comments are trashing Kyloton and saying they didn't put in any effort. And the fact of the matter is, like, let's not paint a rosy picture of V-Rally's triumphant return. This almost seems like the stopgap until wherever WRC 8 is, and in that sense, I quite enjoy it, because I don't know if I've ever actually talked about it properly in the podcast, but WRC 7 is actually my second favourite rally game this generation. I was blown away by it, and this almost feels like that, minus the Great Real World tracks and the official WRC roster, so it's a good rally game. I'm going to be honest, I haven't touched the Rallycross or the Gymkhana. I don't have time for that kind of thing.
Extreme-Khana?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Extreme-Khana. That is the V-Rallycross as well. That's there.
Oh, yeah, right.
There's a lot of side things that I'm guessing don't run that well, purely based on what I've experienced in the regular rally, but yeah, V-Rally 4 is a competent rally game, which is kind of what anybody would have expected. I don't think prior to release there was anything that particularly excited people anyway, so I would say that it's good to see the Switch get a competent racer. It's not good to see it try to retail for £45 plus one pack of DLC that's already out that's £6. This is the Gear Club thing all over again, really. I have no idea why, if it's on the Switch, it suddenly commands such a high price. And it'll be interesting to see if Codemasters do something similar with Grid Autosport, which is pretty much the one game I would say has the potential to do well, depending on how Codemasters approach it.
To be honest, I know you like WRC 7, and I haven't played one of the WRC licensed games since I think the fourth one, which was not made by the same studio as it is now. I think that was like the cutoff where they moved, and I actually played WRC 4 in the Vita, and it was pretty good, but it was kind of like a situation as you described with V-Rally 4, where it's just very clearly the console game, but they just like made a lot of like graphical and concessions to the performance and whatnot, which is fine. The game played well enough, but I will always dream of like a port that really just is optimized to take advantage of the system, and I know we probably will never get that. But for that reason, like I wasn't really looking very forward to the next WRC game. But yeah, I think Grid Autosport actually has a chance, because Feral Interactive I think is working on that, and they handle a lot of they handle a lot of Codemasters ports to Mac, which is one of those things that like I don't understand why like there are companies that specialize in porting games to the Mac, but my thought process is that if they do, then they're probably good at it, and they probably take what they do somewhat seriously. So I'm hoping that they kind of take the same sort of ambition and care with the Switch port, because Grid Autosport was unfortunately one of those games that came out right at a time when absolutely nobody was going to play it, even though like what limited time I've had with the game has been somewhat pleasant. It just came out at absolutely the wrong point in time.
Yeah, it seemed like a strange decision at the time to release it on previous generation hardware, so and the Switch now will get a chance to play it on a more modern console, but I mean, Feral also did the iOS port of the game, so I'd put my smart money on the Switch version being based off of that. That isn't necessarily a full negative. It's just I think we just need to set that expectancy that there will be a port of Grid Autosport. Whether it takes full advantage of the Switch remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if it's based off the iOS version. But like I said, that isn't necessarily a negative because it kind of bypasses this issue we're talking about with V-Rally, where the developer just wanted to make us a kind of more compact version of the game technically that still ticked all the boxes. So I don't want to talk about V-Rally too long because it's fine. It's fine. Like, it's definitely a £15, £20 purchase, and if we're going to be honest, I would have never paid that amount for the game on PS4 and Xbox. So I am one of those people with the problem, in the sense that when you see something like this on the Switch, it almost feels like a compulsion to support it. But I'll be surprised still, even at this point, if WRC8 releases on the Switch. I think the V-Rally port was almost an experiment, and it's not exactly set the world on fire, but it was never going to, really.
Right, well, I can at least say for myself, if it handles better than Gear Club, that puts it on my radar, because Gear Club was just a horrendously awful experience.
Yeah. The gameplay's great. I really enjoy driving the cars, and there's a good selection here. There's a few kind of car choices that people who played old rally games will be happy to see. Like, you've got the old Renault Megane in here, and the Lancia Stratos, of course. And then there's even some other cool ones, like a BMW 3 Series Pikes Peak car. So there's there's a good selection of vehicles, but it just comes down to how highly do you value the portability aspect, because the game is already cheaper on more powerful platforms. But yeah, I think to sum it up, it's definitely as 7 out of 10 as we imagined it was going to be. Fair play to the developers for getting it out before 2019. I think I said in a previous podcast that was the cut-off point for anybody caring for it. It was making it out before the end of the year. They did that for one region, so it's half kudos.
And it was the most important region, let's be honest.
Yeah, I don't think the US are going to be lining up to buy V-Rally on Switch, but it's a competent, well-made rally game that's been shrunk as much as possible to fit on inferior hardware. So, yeah, V-Rally 4, if you really want a portable rally experience that's at least competent and actually features some nice cars and locations to race on, there's really the Japan track is one of my favourites. It's really good. Yeah, if you're looking for something to race on the Switch and that's your only option, then I think you could do a lot worse with V-Rally, because don't ever give money to Eden Games and Gear Club.
Oh my god, you know how many 60-second loads I had to sit through to review that game?
Oh god.
Just to enter a race.
With those shitty sound effects for the traffic lights at the start of the race. I nearly turned the game off when that happened. That's when you know there's just a lack of effort. Like, it's that kind of tinny race start noise. Ugh, awful. It's like the opposite of Gran Turismo's. It's like perfect chimes.
I have never seen less effort put into a game that originally started as a mobile game and was ported to a console. Like, and again, you don't like calling developers lazy, but it's like all I have to go by is what is in front of me, and what is in front of me absolutely exhibits zero ambition whatsoever. Like, just no love, care, or attention put into getting this right, or even fixing any of the mistakes from the previous game. But I don't want to talk about Gear Club. It's not worth it.
They don't deserve the publicity.
Right. So, yeah, well, I mean, now you've piqued my interest. I do want to try it out. tell you what else came out on the Switch, and this is definitely in Time Extend's wheelhouse.
Oh boy.
Sega Ages Outrun came out on the 10th, and it's awesome.
Oh, it's so good. Like, I don't know how many times I'm going to buy Outrun before I die, but each version seems better than the last, and this is a fantastic.
Yeah, there have been some pretty bad versions of Outrun in the past. Like, I think most of them never made it out of Japan, or they did make it out of Japan, but on like weird compilations, like that weird 3D one that was on the PS2, the Sega Classics collection.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. The funny thing about that one was it was on the same disc as a pretty decent Virtua Racing port. Like,
yeah, the Virtua Racing was good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was alright. I mean, it's the best port of the game that we have until M2 comes out with their Sega Ages version later in the year, hopefully. But yeah, Sega Ages Outrun, it's funny, I spent the entire last week at CES, and it was my first time at CES, and it was absolutely crazy. But come whatever day it was, I think it was like Thursday, and an Outrun came out on the Switch, I was able to get on my hotel Wi-Fi, download it. It was like my last day of working at CES and just unwind with some Outrun and then play it on the way home. And it's great. I mean, I've talked about on the podcast before, I think that, like, because of my age, I don't have much of an affinity for the old sprite scaler racing games. They just, like, I just find them too difficult to play because of the way that, like, the horizon pops in, and just that you're kind of on rails, and I feel like you're not given full control. But that said, I mean, being a huge Sega fan, Outrun is kind of like the genesis of everything. And because the music's so good, because the art direction is so good, because it's like, you know, it's as difficult a game as you want it to be. Like, if you want to try and finish in the fastest time and get a really high score, you can do that if you want to go for the hardest route, or you can just kind of take it easy, because the whole idea of Outrun is that it's not, strictly speaking, a racing game. It's a driving game. So that makes it a good fit for the Switch, and M2's job of porting it is incredible. I am constantly in awe every single time they take one of Sega's old games and then they give it like the polish and the level of care that it deserves, and they've done it again with Outrun.
Yeah, I've started to notice, because M2 are so good, people are starting to take for granted the work they do. I've seen a lot of complaints about Outrun being one of the kind of first Sega Ages games, you could say, and the selection. And If you want to realise how good M2's work is, try playing the Sega Mega Drive collection that was released on Switch just last month, and that's officially from Sega. So every time we get a perfect version of Outrun, one of the Time Extend hosts feels very happy, so just remember that.
Yes, every time we get a good version of Outrun, a Time Extend host cries a tear of joy. But
yeah, it's such a good port, and you were talking about the fact that it's a driving game, and that's something that I think a lot of people kind of forget. That, like, if you've never played Outrun before and you play it first, you might assume it's a racing game, but put that to the back of your mind and just enjoy the drive. It sounds weird saying that about a game that is, by technical terms, outdated, but Outrun is just, like you're saying, the art direction is phenomenal, and with this M2 port there's loads of good accessibility options as well, so you can give yourself more time on between each checkpoint and lower the difficulty, and there's a lot of options here outside of the main game. And of course you've got the leaderboards and that type of thing. There's a very addictive loop in Outrun, and this version is pretty much top tier.
it is very addictive, and I have to say that it's like the first time I've ever played Outrun and really paid attention to it and really played it over and over again and given it like the attention it deserves. Most of my previous experiences with Outrun have been like playing Outrun 2 and unlocking the original Outrun, I think, was something you could do in that game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and then once you've done that, like, I played it a little bit, and then, I played it for maybe like 5 minutes, and I never picked it up again, and then I come across some Sega, a Mega Drive or a Genesis Collection or something like that, and I play it again for a couple of minutes, I put it down. It's just like, that's the problem with those games, is that they don't ever really hold my attention, but because the Sega Ages Outrun port is so you know, it's so simple. It's just Outrun. You spend $7 on it, and you get, you know, one of the most influential arcade races of all time in a really polished and well done port. It's like you don't have much of a choice. It's like, no, you have to play this game and see it through and kind of explore all of its little intricacies and stuff. And M2 has done a lot of work to make the game, I wouldn't say more accessible, but kind of get rid of some of the more annoying aspects of it.
Yeah.
Like they have like an old basically version of the track and a new version of the track, which rearranges some of the locations, which I think rearranges them by difficulty, but I might be wrong on that.
I think that is kind of roughly. I mean, it's very minor tweaks, but that's the kind of the way I've seen it as well. Gives it a bit more of a unpredictability element. When you compare the two, one of them is definitely ordered in such a way that each new stage is more difficult. So if that's the kind of progression you're looking for, then it's good that the new setup there as well as the old one.
Yeah, so you get that, and then they also have these like little secrets and changes you can make to the gameplay. Like the first time I finished a stage, I unlocked the power up that I love. That's just called steering wheel. And and what it does is it gives you more grip, but it's actually funny that like and this is going to be another occasion where this podcast has made me constantly like reflective and like self-conscious of the fact that I'm not very good at a lot of racing games, even though like racing games are like all I play in my whole life, and like I'm not that good at Outrun, but with the steering wheel on, it gives you more grip when you're right at the edge, because like an Outrun, normally when you're going through a corner, it's just like a very linear thing of just like your steering angle widens, like you just naturally move to the outside of the track, and it's just one of those things to make the game more difficult. But and that would be fine if it was really easy to see what was coming, but because it's, you know, a sprite scale eraser, the horizon is very shallow. You can't always see what's coming. All you have to go on are those, you know, turning boards and those signs. So the steering wheel does help you, I would say, explore like sections of the world that you maybe aren't so comfortable with before you've memorized them, so that you're not constantly just flying off the track every time you encounter a slightly tight corner. And that's good, and I love that they have all the different options for like different, you know, graphical ways you can play the game. They have redone it so it's in full 16:9 if you choose to play it that way, which I mean you should, because the 4:3 mode is not only is a 4:3, but it's like 4:3 inset inside of like a border, which like is it's very cool from like a nostalgic standpoint, because they give you like the sides of like the Outrun arcade cabinet, but it's a very small window to play the game in. But I love that they do that, and I love that they have like scanline filters, which look very good, and smoothing filters with the scanline filters, a very good way to play the game. So yeah, it's just like I just want them to do every single port. People always complain about the fact that there's no virtual console on the Switch, which is something I sympathize with, but the thing that people don't tend to remember is that, like, when, you know, Nintendo was just working with Sega and Capcom and Konami and all these companies just for them to throw their ROMs onto a virtual console back in the day, you weren't getting, like, lovingly made ports. You were just getting these ROMs that were just, like, gathering dust on some hard drive someplace, and then they're tossed onto the Wii. And it's like, well, now if you spend a little bit more money, you get like the best possible version of that game, because companies like Sega are realizing, publishers are realizing, like, hey, the Switch has a very strong retro following, and it's a perfect place to do that. So if you spend a little bit more money, you can get a version that's like way better than some like kind of, you know, churned out port that doesn't really do justice to the original source material.
Yeah, and that is more and more common. Like I brought up earlier, Sega's own Mega Drive collection on Switch is full of input lag and imperfect emulation, but with M2 it's the complete opposite. You're getting pretty much perfect emulation, and even new soundtracks. Like, we've got a Driver's Mega Mix in this game, and that's like a kind of synthwave version of like 3 of the Outrun tracks that plays while you drive, and it's brilliant. And it just captures the spirit of the game perfectly. So does the arcade remix of Radiation, is it?
Yeah,
with two
Radiation,
track.
Radiation, right? And then you have the 2 tracks from the 3D Outrun release on the 3DS, Cruising Line and Camino Mi Amor, which are both really good. And one thing I love about the way they approach this is that if you notice, all of the regular tracks, when you're selecting a song in the game before you start playing, you see the driver turn the knob to go to a different radio station. That reflects that those are the songs that are actually were made with the hardware that would have been available on the time on the Sega arcade board. Because then when you go to the driver's Megamix, for example, he pulls out a cassette tape, and that is supposed to signal that it's more of like a rearrangement done that doesn't necessarily correspond to the technical limitations of the original Outrun arcade board. So that is what you're dealing with here. That is how devoted M2 is to the craft of being as accurate as possible, but then at the same time recognizing that people today who are buying Outrun for the 90th time want more, and so they give you that as well, and it's just the best possible outcome.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about it before as well, but the 2 tracks that came from the 3DS version, M2 are that obsessed that they tried to perfectly replicate that sound chip that was in the original Outrun machines, and you can really tell. If you've never played Outrun before or never heard any of the music, if that's possible, it's very possible that you would assume those 2 tracks were actually part of the original. That's the amount of effort M2 put in, and I will always give them the £6 or $7 that they ask for these types of games. And you know, it's not a racing game, but I would love to see them get their hands on Sonic 3 Knuckles. It's a game that it gets released less and less nowadays, apparently because of the whole Michael Jackson licensing thing. But yeah, you don't see that game very often at all, and I can only imagine if M2 teamed up with Christian Whitehead and they created the perfect version of Sonic 3 Knuckles. That's the kind of trust I have in M2. They can take pretty much any of my favourite Sega games at this point, and I'm pretty certain they would do it justice.
Absolutely, and I can't stress enough that those 2 songs for 3D Outrun, which is a game that I didn't play because I didn't have a 3DS, but you told me probably back on the 3rd episode that they recorded, they did new tracks for that game, and I had no idea, so I listened to them. And I know you really like Camino. I really like Cruising Line. They're both so good. You would never know that they're new. You know, that's how well they fit. And it actually got me thinking, I'd love to see Outrun representation in Super Smash Brothers, because I came up with some great ideas. I was on my plane home from Vegas, I was thinking about this intensely. So they could have all the songs, obviously, that'd be great, but I was thinking of a stage, and the way the stage would work essentially is picture you're moving as if you were driving, but you're not actually driving. All of the players are basically on the 2D plane, but the world is still moving. So you don't have to worry about you're not moving up on the Y axis or on the Z axis, because you don't do that in Smash. But you're just moving through the world. And then when you get to a junction, the level will signal whether you're going to go left or right, and you have a certain amount of time to get on the right side of the screen. And if you don't, you will die.
That sounds amazing.
And I was like, that would be perfect. I just thought up an amazing, Outrun level in Smash.
You've actually made me think of what could be a good discussion, maybe if it's us doing a guest or something. But we talked one of the first episodes about the perfect kind of Sega transformed racing game, but what if we just had a Smash Brothers for racing games, where you had to pick a roster of 15 cars and tracks from different games? So you've got Grand Valley from Gran Turismo in there, and Desert from Sega Rally. Just create the perfect homage Smash Brothers is, but for racing games. I think that could be a really fun discussion.
That all sounds great, and we'll definitely do that. Yeah, we're definitely trying to get a lot more guests on the show this year, and this episode also marks our beginning of posting episodes to the GT Plant blog as well. So we hope to work with those guys more, and yeah, I feel like that would definitely be a great discussion, because all the people that would be on the show would come from so many different histories of the games that they want to add. and like
Yeah.
like you would probably throw in a track from Shocks, and I have no idea what that would be, but you'd convince me that it's worthwhile. So
Temple 2, mate. Temple 2.
Temple 2. Sure, great. It's a good one. As a quick aside, I was angrily tweeting about this all day, and I know I made a fool out of myself to some very lovely, great people who support our show and have become good friends. But out Auto Week, because this was the first day of the Detroit Auto Show, they were doing like a ranking, basically like a Twitter style like bracket poll of like the best racing games of all time, and they had the first bracket was like Gran Turismo 2 versus Super Mario Kart, and then the other bracket was Pole Position versus F-Zero X, or sorry, F-Zero, not F-Zero X, just F-Zero. And in both occasions, the game I voted for was losing, and I'm just like, I have no faith in the world. Like, come on, people.
I take it Pole Position was winning because of that incredible advert.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good ad, but, and you know what, Pole Position actually, like, I'm sorry, I've like maybe never played Pole Position. I maybe played it on like a cell phone once. It's just not a game that, like, I guess if I ever had any of those Namco museum collections, I would have played it, but it's just not a game that I ever encounter. And when I think of like a sprite scaler, like that was like the original like 3D perspective racing game, which is great, but then I think of like, well, why wouldn't I play Outrun, or why wouldn't I play, I don't know, Top Gear, or like anything that came after that?
Yeah.
But yeah, and then like Gran Turismo, but that one I was like, okay, like, you know, because Pole Position isn't the best racing game of that era, but then, and F-Zero is great because I love the music, but like I don't really ever want to go back and play the original F-Zero. So I could see that, but I was really offended when I saw Super Mario Kart beating, even by just a margin, Gran Turismo 2. I was like, you people have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm pretty sure we've told everybody before, the only acceptable Mario Kart game to consider one of the best is Mario Kart 8. Anything prior to that point has been better, then I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If anybody disagrees with that, we have proved it through science.
I mean, I haven't played 7, because again, I didn't have a 3DS, but that one probably is high up there, right?
Yeah, 7 is like the V-Rally 4. It's a good Mario Kart game that doesn't really do anything. It did introduce the hang glider and swimming mechanics, but I mean they're such non-entities in 8. You can imagine how unexcitable they were on the 3DS. But I mean, I say that I played Mario Kart 7 for about 400 hours, so I did enjoy it, but it's pretty much. There would be no reason to go back and play 7 if you have 8, and there'd be no reason to play 8 if you've got Deluxe. We're in a kind of a bit of a rut right now.
You have to give, but seriously, like, you should give Nintendo, like, I don't mean it to be a criticism, because like almost every Mario Kart has been better than the one before it. So like, you know, 64 obviously, like, we're in 3D now, that's better than Super Mario Kart, and then like, I go back and forth on Double Dash. Some people really like it. I think it's gimmicky, but you can make an argument for that. The lone exception to the not being better than the one before it is the Wii, because Mario Kart Wii was pretty awful, but DS was great. So, you know, they definitely find a way to improve it every single time, which is why I don't know how you could say I want to go back and play Super Mario Kart.
Yep, exactly, except out of nostalgia, pretty much. That would be the only factor, but
and then it's like, I'm not even allowed to say that, because like I'm the most nostalgic person in the world, which is why I'm
we both
on the show, so yeah.
I mean, it's alright when that's what I'm saying. If it's anything else,
other people's nostalgia is not cool. The only acceptable nostalgia is mine.
Yep, that about sums it up. I think we're doing the angry gamer trope pretty well here.
Yeah.
But just for anybody's doubt, the correct tier list is you're allowed to play Crash Team Racing, Sonic Transformed, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. If you're choosing to play any other games outside of that free, then you're giving yourself an inferior experience.
You know what we're going to do? We're going to do an episode where you get me to love Crash Team Racing.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and I don't know, you can like lay out your case or something like that, because admittedly, it's not fair that I don't like Crash Team Racing, because the last time I played it was, I think, probably 18 years ago. So, like, I have no memory of that game except when I was a kid I didn't like it. So I have to play it again. I mean, maybe when they come out with the re-release, but I don't really want to spend money on it. It's also like a deep-seated like distaste for Crash Bandicoot as a character. That drives
you don't
me
like
away from
Spyro either, don't you? Not if I remember right.
I'm not for the Sony mascots. They never did anything for me. But then you know what people don't talk about enough is Diddy Kong Racing.
Yep, that's actually a good shout, because one of the reasons I like Crash Team Racing is because it's actually pretty similar to Diddy Kong Racing in terms of the story structure and stuff. So, yep, I think Diddy Kong Racing's one that is often forgot about. There was actually a really good DS port that came out of Diddy Kong Racing as well, and I think a lot of people don't even know that exists, to be honest. That was one of the weird games I decided to import, even though it came out here eventually. But yeah, Diddy Kong Racing's good.
Yeah. So, the last topic that we should probably go over, because it was a big one that broke over the holidays, was the Mad Box, which is Slightly Mad Studios. I never thought I'd say the words launching their own console.
These guys aim for the moon. You've got to appreciate just how incredibly optimistic they are about what they do. It's amazing to think that we're now talking about a situation where Slightly Mad Studios want to launch their own console, and not only that, Ian Bell's going head to head with Soulja Boy on Twitter.
Yes, that's also been very entertaining. I don't want to. I'm legitimately curious. Like, I would love nothing more than to have Ian Bell on the show and just talk about like what they're going for with this thing, because a lot of people are saying like, oh, Slightly SMS is going to go up against like Sony and Microsoft. I don't see it like that. Basically what I'm picturing is a Steam box, but like a specialized Steam box with their name on it that, you know, maybe we'll get the next Project Cars before the PC does or something like that. Like I can't imagine like and I know Ian has said like he doesn't want this to be a closed off console. He wants it like no exclusives, no like, you know, nothing that would make it difficult to put one game on this but not on the PC, and then they don't want to play the game of going up against those two console makers. So I'm just conflicted. I don't really understand why they're doing this. I mean, obviously I'm sure that he would say that they don't have to, but I just wonder what got them to this point.
Yeah, I want to know the thought process behind the decision to go with it, because the open-ended nature sounds great, but it also gives that inherent second question of, so why would somebody buy it? The Steambox thing arguably hasn't taken the world by storm as much as maybe we would have thought 3-4 years ago, and it just seems like such a weird decision to enter the console market in this climate, where we've seen so many other consoles fall to the wayside or not make out the gates. Like that Atari thing, did that ever come out? They were making some sort of Steam box.
I think they're still working on it. Well, there was the retro system, the VCS.
Oh yeah,
that was a different thing maybe, but yeah, I think the Steam box, like at its core, is a pretty good idea, because I feel like it's a way that you get people who only maybe, you know, play on consoles into the PC space. Like, I think if it really caught on, that would have been something I would have been interested in, because I've never really played on PC. I just have, like, how are they going to make money off of it? How are they going to make enough of the damn thing? How, like, it's so up in the air, but they are so incredibly serious about it. Like, at first, I don't know if I thought it was a joke or if I thought it was just, like, some sort of, like, this is something we would love to do like 5-10 years from now, but we haven't even like seriously had the conversations yet. It's just like early, but like, and I know it's still early. I know they're still probably like 2 or 3 years away from release, but like they you know, Ian started tweeting renderings and asking people which rendering they like the most, and clearly like he has a mastery of the publicity cycle. Like he's been very smart about like just every couple of days just like putting something out there to stoke the interest. And you know, I think that's great, but it's just such an unfathomable thing I was going to CES, and I was actually curious if I would see them there. And I don't know. I mean, like they weren't there this year, but I have to imagine I might run into them next year or the year after that, because they are clearly like full steam ahead.
Oh yeah, this is serious. Ian said on the GT Planet forums that they've already had an order in from China, basically, for X amount of Mad Boxes. Not sure how that transaction came about. Maybe that's something you can clear up for us on the pod. But yeah, he says there's interest there, and I think the thing is that one of the reasons why you think it might be a prank at certain stages is because, like you said, Ian's nature of he likes having a laugh as well as being a serious businessman. One of the first times I realised that was when somebody asked about the Wii U version of Project Cars, and basically Ian Bell just wrote like a sentence that said something like, "Oh, we just don't like Nintendo fans," and that was it.
Yeah,
Nintendo just cites as they do reporting about
Yep.
that, and it was funny. And I'm even seeing the same now. Somebody replied to the Madbox thing, because I don't get why people do this shit. They replied to the tweet and said, can I have a free one to put on my streaming channel and shit? And then Ian just responded saying, yes. It's just like, it's that perfect response. That guy
great.
has basically been told no, but because he said yes in the most blunt fashion, it's brilliant. And that's the thing, like, for every real bit of information, it's shrouded in mystery, like the Project Cars Revolution game that was teased on the console. Like, that just seems like the type of thing that Ian would love bannering us up with, just setting us on the wrong trail to a game that maybe doesn't exist. But we know there's going to be another Project Cars, and we know it's going to be different than the rest, so who knows. But take it from me, the last game that I properly loved was Sega Rally Revolution, and we know how that ended up, so maybe not go with that subtitle.
That's true. Revolution is, I feel like it's a very loaded name for a game, because it's either like you expect it to upend everything, or it's like a really failed attempt at doing that, and one way or the other, usually someone out there isn't happy, but I guess that goes for just games in general and the world, but that's another story. Yeah, he definitely has a way on Twitter, which is really funny, and like I do admire his like going straight out to just say, like, not necessarily like go to a certain outlet. Like, even though I'm a journalist and I would love to get the story that they're launching a console, I like that he just puts on Twitter like, it's a Mad Box, and everybody's like, what? And he's just like, yeah, here it is, and they're like, what? And it just everything. And he's been doing that on GT Planet for a while too. He's been a member for a long time, and he'll talk to the community, and he'll just like make random announcements about the game, which like maybe, to certain people seem like kind of like sort of small potatoes, but they actually shed light on like upcoming features and stuff like that. So he is a man of the people, that's for sure. And the one thing I will say is that I saw the latest design for the console, the one that had Project Cars Revolution supposedly playing on it in that render, and I do very much prefer that to the M. So thank you, Slightly Mad, for not making your system a giant leather, because I wasn't liking that too much.
Yeah, it was certainly ambitious, but this one has that like sleek, almost routerish look to it.
Yeah, but like a cool router, like a router I would want to display, because the M just looked like right, exactly. The M reminded me of, if you can think way back to when you were a wee child and they were coming out with the Xbox, and the rumor was that it was just going to be a big X. And that seemed cool for about 2 seconds until you realize, like, where do I put this thing? How do I store it? How do I carry it? Like, how would this fit into my actual life? And no one would ever do anything like that again, so.
You mean that the Xbox 720 wasn't real?
Yeah, well, the Xbox 360 could have been a giant sphere. I guess it's good they didn't do that either.
It's actually pretty funny, like, you think about all those fake renders of consoles and names. I always remember, this is going to be such an obscure bit of trivia, But did you ever see the Hugh Jackman film Real Steel, where he's like fighting the big like, Rock'em Sock'em robots? It's almost like raw. So like it's an alright film. But in one of the fights at the end in a huge arena, there's like an advertisement for Xbox in the background, and it clearly says Xbox 720. And it's one of those things where I always wonder if that was actually going to be considered the name for the Xbox One at some point, or it was just somebody having a laugh with Microsoft's permission. But yeah, you see all these fake video game consoles and stuff in TV shows, but that one always stuck out to me because it explicitly mentioned Xbox.
I mean, I think it very much could have been a working title. Something like that makes a lot of sense because I'm sure they had like probably 9 different names of what they wanted to call the thing, and they chose the most boring one possible. So, you know, there's that.
Yeah.
I remember when the 360 was like, there was some speculation it was going to be called, there was the Next was one of them, and then, or like the Xbox Next, and then Xenon. But Xenon may have just been like the code name.
Yeah, I remember that one.
That would have been cool in like a mid-2000s kind of way that would have aged horribly.
Hey, we ended up with a Wii U. Anything better than that?
Yeah, the Wii U is I think, just objectively the worst name of a console of all time. Well, unless you count some of those weird ones that never left Japan, like the FM Towns Marty.
That's incredible. I would just love to have an episode looking at the most ridiculous like game names and console names throughout the years, because there's been some ridiculous ones. I also like the fact that during the PlayStation 2 era, there was a time where loads of low-budget racing games were getting made, and they weren't even trying to call them like original names or exciting names. It'd just be like GTR Racing, sort of sounds like Gran Turismo, or there was one that was in Europe, I think it got renamed elsewhere, and it was just like Viper Trail or something that made it sound like an adventure game. Yeah, but there's... Oh god, there's that whole generation of cheap Midas, I believe it was, that published them, racing games that were pretty poor.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a bunch of conversations I've had recently, one of which was on Twitter with a friend of the show, Fernando, and I got on the subject of like Beetle Adventure Racing, and then remembered that there was a game called HSV Adventure Racing, which is Beetle Adventure Racing, but for Australia. It's the exact same game, but they're like... And Beetle Adventure Racing is a fantastic game, but they decided what would be more fun-loving and just energetic and happy, you know, more than a Beetle. Oh, I got it, a Holding Commodore.
That's phenomenal.
That was really weird. And then, you ever hear the Xbox game Group S Challenge?
Yes.
Okay, this is a game that I think this is the most forgotten. I have a theory this is the most forgotten racing game ever made, because I never ever. I think I for a long time convinced myself I was the only person who knew anything about it. But in Japan, it was called Circus Drive.
Circus Drive.
Yeah.
Wow, that puts across the point.
And Need for Speed for a long time was called Overdriving in Japan, which is really weird.
What a weird change, yeah.
Yeah.
I think as well in the US, V-Rally also went by Need for Speed V-Rally, didn't it?
Yeah, there's an interesting thing. I was I think I wrote an article for GT Planet a while back. It was on the Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, and basically it was a mirror mode. And my kind of thesis for it, if there was a thesis, was just that Need for Speed, all it is just like a reflection of whatever the prevailing car culture is at the time. So like in the early 2000s, it was like supercars. In the early 90s, or the mid to late 90s, it was supercars. And then in the early 2000s, it was street racing. So they became a street racing game. And then about 5 or 6 years later, they were like, well, the brand of street racing that was cool back then, like Fast and Furious 1 and 2, isn't cool anymore. So now we have to go for this grittier thing. So they did that. And now you look at like The Run, and then like most recently with Payback, and it's like they're very much going for the action movie thing, because that's what does well with like, because I mean, if you actually look at like how Fast and Furious started and where it is now, and how Need for Speed started and where it is now, it's like a parallel, like they just follow that trend.
Oh yeah, definitely. They were pretty much identical for so long. And the weird thing is, like, you brought up Need for Speed The Run, and that's one of those weird games that isn't quite held in high regard that I consider one of my favourite Need for Speeds, because it did the whole, like, stupid, over-the-top storyline about revenge, because it's always about revenge. But it didn't hide behind, like, an open world mechanic or something. It was just literally like, here is a 3-hour story mode.
Yeah.
Loads of random races. And I don't know why, like, in this weird 90s nostalgic way, I appreciated how straightforward that game was made. And the soundtrack as well was actually by Brian Tyler, who people will know now, who did the Formula 1 theme song.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah.
I love the F1 theme song. It's so good.
You should listen to the Need for Speed The Run soundtrack, because some of them literally sound like test versions for what would become the Formula 1. But yeah, it's actually... The Run's one of those weird games, I think, in retrospective, if people were to go back and play, would actually appreciate a bit more, because at the time it felt very unambitious and incredibly short, which is true. But it was such a focused game compared to the... Oh, this is a game about revenge and not wasting any time. Well, you can also just drive about randomly in the middle of a story mission and have no repercussions. So, like, The Run kind of nails the feel better than Payback could have hoped to do, and Need for Speed 2015 as well, I guess.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I just think that Need for Speed, it just, like, chases whatever vision of car culture ultimately will make them the most money at any given time, which, I mean, yes, it's a business, so that makes sense, but it also kind of makes it seem like the series doesn't have a soul, because it just constantly reflects just whatever's out there. But I think that's how you ended up getting games like V-Rally being licensed as a Need for Speed title, because in the late 90s, rally games were everywhere, and, like, not like today, where there are a lot of rally games, but nobody really plays them. Like, back then, people were playing them, so it's a little bit different. But I remember... Well, the other weird thing about V-Rally in the States is that the first one was a Need for Speed title. The second one, I think, was also a Need for Speed title, but only on the PlayStation. And then they came out with a Dreamcast version that did not have the Need for Speed branding. And the weird thing about that one is that became Test Drive V-Rally. So V-Rally has actually belonged to two different franchises. It's so weird. Like, it just... And it's all just because Infogrames was developing it, so whoever Infogrames partnered up with to publish the game would just put their own name on it.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting you bring up Infogrames, because they do have a history with that type of thing. There was a racing game on the PlayStation 1 in the UK that was named after the Max Power After Tuner magazine, which was pretty much what you would expect. Loads of riced up Corsas and girls with no tops on. And that game was called Max Power, but it definitely has a different name in the US. I can't remember what it's called, but it was definitely called Max Power here. I'm going to look it up very quickly.
Let's find this out. This sounds very interesting. This is definitely a late episode of the podcast fodder that we need to get the answer to.
Yeah, definitely. It was called C3 Racing.
Oh god, I've never heard of that. What the hell is that? I was expecting, like, Street Racing Syndicate. I wasn't expecting... Oh wow, that's weird.
Yeah, C3 Racing Car Constructors Championship, but in the UK, only the UK, it was known as Max Power Racing.
No, you know what it was? It's because this never... Oh god, this is weird. So C3 Racing never came out here. According to Wikipedia, in North America, the game was released as TNN Motorsports Hardcore TR. What the hell?
Talking about daft racing game names, you couldn't make up how this is tied in.
Now, I played one of the TNN Motorsports games on the PlayStation. It actually, like, isn't bad, one of the early ones, but I never played this one. That's weird, man.
It's a pretty decent developer. How do you pronounce that name? You'll be better at this than me, Adam.
What, is it Utechnics? Yeah, it's Utechnics.
Utechnics, that's the one, yeah.
I used to call them Utechinks, because I didn't...
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Did you just commit a hate crime on the podcast?
Yeah,
but,
well, moving on.
Yeah, they also made Total Driving, which was really good. I wonder if that had a different name in the US.
Total Driving? Yeah,
PlayStation 1.
Oh, it's okay. It's in the list of all of their titles on Wikipedia, and
Ah,
no, I can't.
Car and Driver presents Gran Turismo.
Oh, that game. Yeah. So that one I played. When I was really, I must have been like 4 or 5 years old, but I played that game. I mean, I can't remember anything about it. I was really young, but also I will never forget Big Mother Truckers, because I didn't get that joke until I was like, like a teenager. And I just didn't understand, like, why is it called Big Mother Truckers? And I mean, there it is, man. Test Drive Le Mans. It's right there. It's right there.
We're getting there.
Now that was, but that was only Technics did the PlayStation version of that, and then Infogrames Melbourne House did the ones that's actually good. But that I think will be our next episode. So we'll finally get that test drive pod I've been wanting to have for so long. That game is so good.
I'm looking forward to it.
Real quick, remember Ferrari Challenge Trofeo Pirelli?
Yeah.
Yeah. That game was okay in the world before Gran Turismo 5. But then Gran Turismo 5 wasn't very good either, so...
Yeah, I always remember it had that very strange chase cam where, like, it was, like, halfway up the car's, like, back window. So it was, like, a kind of... almost as if you're in the cockpit, but not. It was very awkward to play with. But one of the reasons I did enjoy that game is because it supported custom soundtracks on the PlayStation 3. So you could just store songs on your hard drive and then put it in a playlist, and you could just listen to it as you drive, which was pretty cool at the time.
That game had a fantastic track roster. It had, like, tracks that you don't see very often. Like, there's this awesome one called Mont Tremblant, although I think it has a different name now, but in Canada is where that track is, and it's really good. And just, like, all these weird locations that, like, only Ferrari Challenge, like, corresponding series around the world would ever go to. So you won't get them in, like, your Gran Turismos and your Forzas and your F1s and what have you. So, yeah, that was a interesting game. And then they re-released it as Supercar Challenge. And I just like this, thing this basically hour of just, like, let's just talk about random-ass games that we haven't talked about in 10 years.
Yeah, that's kind of where we've ended up for the first podcast of 2019. So, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons we enjoy doing this podcast, because we've just ended up talking about completely random titles that we wouldn't have decided to bring up any other time. This came from discussing the Mad Box. Look where we are, but yeah, I guess that kind of brings it to a wrap, doesn't it?
Yeah, I will just say look forward to a tier list of what's better, C3 Racing, Car and Driver Grand Tour, or Group S Challenge.
What an episode that should be.
Alright, well, this was a lot of fun. And yeah, this has been Time Extend, and I'm Adam Ismail. You can find me on Twitter at Pioneer Spine. Brendan is Ed Balls. I didn't mean to steal your spot. I just wanted to say Ed Balls because it's hilarious.
With 4 S's.
With the 4 S's, right? And Happy New Year, people!
Belated Happy New Year, and we'll see you on the next one.